There it is. Music. Lovely. Hey, welcome back to the Parc Fermé for podcast number 728, the Imola Grand Prix review. I'm calling it Imola Grand Prix because I don't think I can get the real name. The Emilia Romagna Grand Prix. Premio Pirelli F1 is made in Italy, all that good stuff. It's Imola, folks. This is Todd.
No, Todd, not now.
AKA Negative Camber. You know I've asked you here.
Has convinced the villagers that I'm harmless.
It's exactly what I need you to do. Tonight, for your kind consideration, we're going to review the race from Imola. But before doing that, I have to introduce my guest tonight. Some might refer to him as Polqua Minerali, but most know him as the International. He is the sporting manager of team number 23, the Aston Martin in IMSA series, the Heart of Racing team. That's how you know him. That's how you love him. Paul, welcome.
Thank you. Quite a weekend we've been having here, isn't it?
Yeah, it sure is.
Oh, my goodness.
Quite a week. You know, I was looking for post-race comments from Aston Martin, and I went to their website. I completely missed it. They had a nice little blurb about you guys on their media
Did they
site.
really?
Yeah.
Okay. Did they mention me many times or just a few times?
Well, they said, due to the cunning genius of Paul Charsley, they're mounting a real effort in the Americans, and had it not been for Paul Charsley, no.
Yeah, that's what I sent them. They asked me for a quote.
They just reprinted your press release.
Yeah.
That was great.
We just, whatever drivers, we just plug them in, but it's really everything I control around the car that helps.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Oh my. So I know you were watching the race in real time this morning. I was slightly delayed from you, but I too was watching the race this morning. We were texting briefly back and forth and watching the Grand Prix Emilia Romagna.
Yes, I was trying not to be a spoiler.
You did a great job.
The main thing I just said, you might want to go to the store and buy some more donkey awards, because I think we're going to be out for the season on this race alone.
I know. You basically were texting saying, "Get to the show!
This is the show!"
And it was like, oh my gosh, where's the race? I don't, I know.
Donkey, you're a donkey, you're okay, you're a donkey.
I know. It was exactly. Wow. Oh my. Yeah, it was crazy.
Looked like a club Formula Ford race, quite honestly, and that mistakes were going on out there.
Right. It was crazy. Well, Paul, it was changing conditions, damn it.
Well, if only Jensen Button was there, he would have sorted them all out.
Yeah, he would have.
But yes, it is changing conditions. But you just got to figure it out, man. They're the best drivers in the world, right?
Yeah, right. You know, Paul, I'm trying to represent you here this evening.
Oh, thank you.
Attire. I got your flag there.
Right.
And on the front, it's a GBR, right?
Thank you, Team England. Well, Team Great Britain, even bigger and better.
Even bigger, yes. Yeah. Team Great Britain, that ensnares a lot of people in that.
Including the Welsh.
Including the Welsh. Very and powerful. Kent, I might add.
And Kent is actually, just got hauled back into the
That's right.
Great Britain. Yeah, they're trying to make their way across the channel there, but then they decided, oh no, it doesn't look good over there, let's get back.
All the people in Kent trying to secede, they were doing a Valtteri Bottas giving the middles to
they were.
The rest of, quote, Great Britain. And
then it got a little uncomfortable and they just kind of pulled themselves back and everything got a little bit quiet for a while. So welcome back, Kent.
Yeah, it's good to have you back, Kent. Oh, we missed you. Oh boy. All right. Shall we talk about the Grand Prix at Imola, the Emilia Romagna Grand Prix?
Yeah, unless you want to talk about some kind of egg condiment or whatever. I've been missing out on that, and I can't wait for the summer. There's a bit of a break where we can really have it. Now we've got a wine, cheese, and
condiment.
Egg condiment podcast coming, so I'm looking forward to that too. But yes, I think we have a lot to talk about this race.
We do, beyond salad cream. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yes.
Oh boy. Well, there was a race this weekend at Imola. It's a old historic track. It's been on there. It's difficult to race at Imola and not feel the weight of Senna and Ratzenberg. It lingers in the air there. It's just a site of a tragic accident that robbed the sport of arguably one of its greatest drivers of all time in Ayrton Senna and Roland Ratzenberger. And a serious accident with Rubens Barrichello.
It was We don't even want to go over that weekend again. But yes, you're right. You cannot go to a race at Imola and not bring back those memories and emotions for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And they had a little piece on Sky with Damon Hill that I thought was kind of nice, where he was talking about his win there the following year after Senna died there, and how they put in the chicane at Tamburello, and how he won that race. So it was a nice piece that Damon did. Anyway, it's a tricky old track in some ways, Paul. It's not easy to pass there, but there's limited runoff. They were really strict on the racing lines this weekend. 3 weeks ago, they changed the racing line rule 3 times and twice in the race. And this, they were, Michael Massey's having none of it. You go over the white line, you're out, Yeah,
as Lando found out, right?
Yeah, and Lando found out, yeah. So they were marshaling those pretty strong, and some post-race marshaling 2 and 3 hours after the race, which changed the finish order, which I tend not to like that. Bernie Ecclestone always said, when people leave a race, they should know who the winners and everything was. You shouldn't be changing things 3 hours later,
Yeah, especially when you find out what the penalties were. It's like, okay, that was something that was going on during the race that you knew happened during the race, so execute it then. If you need to.
Yeah, exactly. A couple of key elements of the race. The red flag allowed the teams to service the cars during that and change the tires, and that meant that the final part of the race was effectively a 29-lap sprint. Rain before the start of the race meant that nearly all the cars started on intermediates, with just 4 on the full wet. There were 2 safety cars before the red flag, which occurred when the track was almost dry. During the second safety car period, all the runners moved onto slick tires. Everyone selected mediums once the crossover point was reached, apart from the Haas, which went to softs at that time. The temperatures were cooler this weekend, which should have played into the hands of Mercedes. And so it was 21-degree ambient, 25 track. That's in Celsius. That's a new money, as well as it got a little windy because the rain came through and clouds came through. There were a number of different strategies throughout the race, the race was short by 1 lap. There was that extra formation lap. In total, there were 5 different strategies out of the top 6 teams, which was kind of interesting. As it turns out, the race won by Max Verstappen. Let's start with Red Bull up front. Red Bull entered this weekend, Paul, with the bit between their teeth, because they felt they had the faster car in Bahrain, but lost out due to the great tactics by Mercedes. And come Saturday, they didn't take pole, but they had 2 drivers in second and third on the grid and 2 different strategies. And this was lining up to be a very great attack on the pole sitter, Lewis Hamilton. So you have 2, Perez in second, Max in third, split strategies. They had all the tools at play to harass Lewis. Both Sergio and Max said they made errors on their final quali laps. They left pace on the table. And since Lewis's wingman, Valtteri Bottas, was mired down in 8th, it was really 2 against 1 and looking good for Red Bull's long run pace. Looked very competitive too, I might add, during the practice session. So this looked like, a fox hunt for 2 hounds, right? And all that went out the window as it rained just before the start. And Sergio Perez had several unforced errors that ultimately scuttled his race and left him down in 11th and out of the points. And for all of his skill as a tire management king, he was not able to get on top of the changing conditions. But to be fair, I thought it was interesting, even after Saturday's performance and putting it on the front row, he still wasn't convinced, Paul. He said he still wasn't really on top of the car.
Yeah, that's tough. I mean, this second car in Red Bull seems to be, have a big cloud over it, and we figured, and I think he still will get his head around it a little more, but it definitely does seem like the design of the car around Max and his driving style his style does not equate to many other drivers on the grid who are able to adapt to that. Perez has a lot more experience than the other guys that went in that second car. So you would think he would be able to figure it out, because he's driven a lot of cars with different teams. He should have enough tools in his box there to bring out and try and get to the point where he is really comfortable. But he did do a stunning qualifying lap, and I agree. I think they both left time on the table. They should have been an all Red Bull front row, but Lewis didn't make a mistake, and they did, and so they kind of opened the door for Lewis to do some more damage to the Red Bull team. And so the qualifying was an interesting one, but yeah, as you say, it was all negated, and I was excited because I thought, okay, Perez is probably gonna jump and get in the lead. That's what was my thoughts anyway. And then they're going to be playing that cat and mouse game with Lewis, because as we saw in the dry during the race, Lewis still had a lot of speed in that car.
Yeah, he did.
In race pace too, not as much as Max, obviously. So that was a bit of a shame, but Max fixed all his qualifying woes pretty quickly with that start that he made.
Yeah, no doubt. Max, is as much as Perez didn't have the pace.
You like my pace? You like
No, not particularly.
Not
today's. No, but Max, on the other hand, had a good race to take victory. And although he nearly threw it away there on that restart, whoa, yes. That was quick. Yeah, that was brutal. But after the red flag, that restart, he was trying to get heat in his tires just before the restart behind the safety car and almost threw it away. He did manage to pull out a convincing lead over the McLaren and Ferrari and take the win. Max's intermediate tire start jumped Lewis, as you mentioned. That was a real key to all of this. And the overcut that Mercedes tried on Max did not work. Lewis came back through the field, finished just 22 seconds off Max. I have to think at that point Max was just controlling the race, probably wasn't pushing that hard. So I don't think, and I don't think he had any reason to. He had certainly pace and time in hand. There were some comments, wow, Lewis was really fast. Look how much he gained back on Max. But I think Max was controlling the pace at that point. But certainly that jump was critical because all of their strategy, Paul, went out of the window when it rained. Everybody's on inters. And so it was all down to that start. Yeah. Who was going to get the best start? Perez balked a little bit. Max had a terrific start, got around Perez and Lewis and took the lead. That was a crucial moment.
Yeah, I think, Max, from what they said on the commentary, starting in second gear, that was probably a key there. You can, starting from first gear obviously gives you a bit more power, but if you can't put that power down, it doesn't give you, it's not an advantage at all. So starting off in second gear gives you a bit better control of the throttle, the power, getting off the grid there. And I think obviously it showed that thinking outside the box a little bit. It's not like he invented starting in second gear, but it's unusual even in a Formula One car in the rain for people to even give up a little bit of power they think they need just for playing with the traction and helping the driver control the traction a little bit better. So it obviously worked great. He squeezed it on the side there on the grass. It was kind of a hectic start there, entertaining for sure. But yeah, he got the job done. Didn't look back, quite honestly. I mean, he had the race covered. I was interested to know that he didn't really go for that flying lap, because usually that's been his MO. Yeah, always is, right? It's like, well, this is, whatever it is, I'm still going to put in the fastest lap and show people my pace. And Lewis was the end up getting that extra point. Hopefully that doesn't come back and bite him, but fully understand that he's in the hunt for the championship. Yep. And he's got to think of that right now and not kind of, and hold back a little bit on the Mad Max style, because he's got a great weapon to race with this year. And so I think he's going to enjoy it, and he's going to be a little calmer and not think he has to prove himself in that kind of way every race either. I think everyone accepts in the fact that he's actually in the hunt for a championship right now.
Yeah, and Lewis got that fast lap, but he had the benefit of DRS to get that fast lap. Max didn't. Right. So that played into that. Max also made the comment that, he got a good start, got the jump, but he wasn't walking away from Lewis. He said, so, I mean, it's not like we're clearly dominant. He wasn't walking away. And if you think about it, that distance kind of yo-yoed. But let's talk about Lewis and kind of how that compared.
Well, do we want to get back to Sergio? I know we didn't talk about him too much, go ahead. But it was a pretty horrendous race for Sergio, unfortunately. And as I said, we just kind of touched on a little bit about him being the experienced guy out there. I thought he did himself all kinds of good qualifying second, even if he doesn't say he's not comfortable with the car. I think he undid that all today. I think it was a real shame. I think he was pushing too hard, taking a bit too much risk. He's in a car that can do the job. I don't think he needs to try that hard. He's been used to taking a car, on his back and just hustling and bustling it through. And sometimes that didn't pay off, but it wasn't so apparent because he wasn't in a car that can win the race,
Yeah, right.
But now he is. So he's got to think a little bit about how he runs these races. And it was a bit of a nightmare for him. Maybe because he hasn't got his head around the car, that even in these tricky conditions, he's even further behind. That's what it seemed like. He was just kind of behind the car a little bit, and so forcing something that maybe wasn't there. So it was a shame because he really, once everything reset, really had a chance to, make up for some of those errors and score some great points. And so when he threw it off the road the last time, I just dropped my hair. I was like, oh, Sergio, come on.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess, I'm trying to think in his defense. You have Sergio Perez, Carlos Sainz, Daniel Ricciardo, Sebastian Vettel. Those are the four guys I can think of that have switched teams to new cars, right? And they're all taking time to get on top of those cars. I mean, they're markedly different, in the way that they perform. And even the interview with Carlos Sainz, he said, I've been in 4 different cars in 6 years, and they're just every one of them is completely different. And he was shocked that they could set almost identical lap times being so completely different, right? Yeah. And so in that defense, I think Sergio said it was going to take 4 or 5 races to get on top of that. I think Daniel feels like very, very similar to that. Certainly Vettel has made that. So, I think there's a common theme there, Paul, and I'm assuming I take it as writ. I think from a professional driver standpoint, we know all 4 of the guys that I just mentioned are all incredibly talented, drivers.
Yeah.
So I think there is some legitimacy to trying to get on top of the car, whereas the incumbents, Charles Leclerc, Lando Norris, Lance Stroll, they've all been driving these cars for a while. Max Verstappen, they've all been driving these cars. These cars arguably could be really tailored to how they drive. And so, that's the defense I'm having anyway.
Yeah, and maybe there's something to that. And the one thing is, when the new driver pairings come in or one new driver comes in, usually they're starting once again with a new car. But because we're carrying over car from the previous year, those drivers who are staying with their team have even more, they know these cars already. It's not like both drivers are going to learn their new cars. That driver's been driving that same car basically for a whole year. So I think maybe, there's some truth to that. Absolutely.
Mercedes, Lewis Hamilton in P2, Valtteri Bottas DNF. Hamilton had pole, and that seemed to surprise him and the team a little bit over the radio. That, to me, means that despite their upgrades they brought for this weekend, they still weren't 100% sure that they were really quicker than Red Bull. I think they were a little surprised by that. Lewis got jumped at the start on Enders, and that stung because the real threat was the dry weather split strategy that Red Bull had to use against him. So when it rained, that's a bit of a grand equalizer. That was all equalized, and yet he lost out at the start. So that was tough. But he was, he was driving thereabouts, and it yo-yoed back and forth a little bit. The team tried the overcut with Max, despite the terrific in-lap pace that Lewis had. He had a slightly longer stop that sort of spoiled that attempt for the overcut. As I mentioned, Lewis and Max yo-yoed around, 2 to 5 seconds-ish. At any one point in time, it just kind of yo-yoed back. So as Max said, it wasn't clearly domination. He didn't walk away from Lewis. Lewis was there or thereabouts. So the first half of the race, but it was really at lap 32 where it all went wrong for Mercedes as Lewis tried to overtake George Russell off the dry line. and this left him against the wall, reversing back on track and a lap down. Now, you could almost see that because at the time it happened, there was a helicopter shot. And George was there, and I saw him pull out, and it went right through my head right before it happened. Not that I'm a genius, but I'm sure everybody else is like, oh, he's on those dry tires. It's a wet line over there. Is he going to be able to make this stick? And I was getting ready to say, my gosh, what a brilliant drive, offline on dries, but he just couldn't hold it there. Maybe a little impatient trying to get around that. Some argued that George should have let him through earlier, that George hadn't, ceded the position like he should have. But the red flag period handed Lewis a full lap back, allowed him, that put him in P10, P9 or 10 at the restart. And he engaged from there in a very quick recovery drive to second place. A couple points I wanted to raise and get your thoughts on, Paul. Some argue that reversing back on track, that he shouldn't have been allowed to do that, that he should have been penalized. I think the regulations allow it if it's done safely or in a safe manner.
Okay.
Yeah, I know. I know what you're thinking. So others were not happy that he was given an entire lap back after he screwed his race, was well out of the points. It was his fault. He went off. He screwed up. The red flag gave him a full lap back. He was able to put a new nose on, got brand new tires, had his lap back. That allowed him to march right from ninth all the way back up to second place and minimize the points damage that otherwise he would have had.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's nothing you can be upset about with the way they ran the red flag, as far as I'm concerned. The rules are the rules, and it wasn't just Lewis Hamilton they did it for. They did it basically for the entire field up to Ricciardo, I think. So I think Stroll was the first recipient of getting his lap back, and that's just what the rules are. They put, and so there's nothing biased towards Lewis in that fact. He was just a recipient, a lucky recipient, obviously, to getting that back. Now, reversing the car on a track in a safe manner is actually, in my opinion, not possible. I mean, there's so many I can't even believe it's actually allowed, and that's a very gray area, making it safe. And certainly where he went off, as we know, the track is narrow, tricky conditions, right? Anything can happen in those conditions. Sadly we learned that, at Suzuka a few years ago, and you cannot reverse onto a track safely. It should never have happened. Never have happened. And absolutely you should have got penalized for it. And I think most series that you will see, that is a rule in stone that you should never do that. And you instantly get disqualified in many series. I've been kind of, chief steward on a couple of things, and I know that for sure is, a taboo thing, unless you're in, a runoff area, right? He basically reversed onto the track, onto a live track, right?
It was a live track, and some would say, well, but there was double yellows at that corner.
Don't care.
It's still a live track.
It's still live track. They can barely see anything behind them going forward, let alone reversing, right? And we saw how he put it on. If he had stayed off track somehow, maybe, but he literally reversed it right onto the tarmac. And I think that should never happen. It should never happen. And if it does happen, there has to be severe consequences for it, because it should never be a choice for a driver to do that.
Yeah, it's
even if you're Lewis Hamilton.
Right. And if memory serves correct, you instantly are disqualified if you reverse in pit lane in Formula One. I mean,
what's safer? I think it's safer to do that, right? It's safer to reverse in pit lane than it is,
onto a live track.
Rather than having someone bearing down on you at 180 miles an hour, trying to figure out when you're going to stop reversing.
Right.
I don't agree with that move, and I don't agree with the stewarding on that, or the rule, if it is a rule that allows it.
Yeah. Well, let us know what you guys think. Certainly, opinions were divided from what I can see from F1 fans that were voicing their endorsement or disdain for the move. Regardless of where you stand on those issues, his drive back to second was executed incredibly well, required a lot of patience on his part and calmness that many others failed to show on Sunday.
I think it showed that I know we keep talking about the Red Bull being the fastest car on the track or this year, but if it is, it's by a very finite amount that Lewis Hamilton can sometimes make up the difference, right? Even to Max. And the ability for the Mercedes to run in dirty air for as long as he had to because he had to basically pass 7 cars and running 7 cars dirty air, at least for partial laps, if not laps after laps when he was dealing with Lando and the Ferraris, just shows you that the percentage that Mercedes has over some of those cars.
Well, and I think the prevailing notion is that Mercedes doesn't do well at all behind cars in dirty air, and that it's because of its superior shove and in 7 years of leading, they designed it for leading, and I think, I've heard all the pundits on Sky say that it doesn't do well in dirty air. I would say in the hands of Lewis Hamilton today, it did very well. In dirty air, and he managed that impeccably, I think.
Right. I mean, it takes a lot of experience to know how to run that, right? Because you got to know how close you can get and when's the good time to push to get close, rather than just try and run behind the other car and wait for your tires to be overheated after 2 laps. So you got to play that game as a driver and know when to hold them, know when to fold them, corner by corner, really. Move, and that's exactly what he did. It was a beautifully executed move up. Obviously, DRS helps a lot, but still, he did have to run behind cars quite a lot, and he did a great job of managing that disability to still be able to make the passes.
Yeah, no doubt. I'm not sure what Bottas was struggling with, but he said he couldn't trust the rear end of the car.
I think. Sorry.
Oh boy.
Sorry, Valtteri, but that was awful.
He said that he was struggling. He couldn't trust the rear end of his car during qualifying. There was some talk that there was some tire warming issues that caused that problem. Air quotes. That may very well be, but it doesn't explain why he couldn't make up much ground from 8th in the early part of the race. And one might be forgiving for finding the conditions very tough, because they were, and that's correct. But when it dried, he still wasn't moving forward.
Right.
Something isn't clicking this year with the car in Valtteri. And at this point, it's very difficult for me anyway to consider him anything beyond a wingman, and certainly not a fierce contender for the title. I like Valtteri a lot, but he's had a lot of time to mount a challenge against Lewis, and that's never happened. And that's just not in the cards, it doesn't seem, this year either. But perhaps most visibly during this race was the collision he had with George, and both of them pointing the fingers at each other. George suggested that Bottas jinked right, and there's a gentleman's agreement that you don't do that at 170 miles an hour down a straight like that. And he suggested that maybe it was because he was George. Any other driver, he may not have done that, which prompted Toto Wolff to say that comment was bullshit. The stewards deemed it a racing incident, but how did you see it, Paul?
You know what I have to say to this in defense of Bottas? F you, Todd.
Yeah, to all those naysayers. F you. That's right.
Yes. Yeah. So yeah, horrendous day. I mean, we've seen Bottas struggle sometimes, and most of the time we find, there was damage or this or that. Well, it doesn't seem like that was the case here. He was just struggling, and maybe there's some compromise that they're doing with the Mercedes to work with that higher rake that Lewis is able to handle and Bottas isn't.
It could be.
We know Bottas's style is very narrow when he really performs by the track, right? And conditions, I think. There's no doubt he can really perform and beat Lewis on some days, but it has to be a very perfect day for him or a track that really suits his style. So I think maybe some of the compromises or changes in the personality they're having to put in this Mercedes is something that he hasn't got his head around with the rear end, because that's definitely what would what would change, right?
Yeah.
With the car by doing that. So I don't foresee him struggling and being in 8th place and having the struggles he did here. But I think it was everything added together. It was like his worst nightmare in a way of conditions, how the car's handling, and what kind of track this is, and how you have to attack it. Which we know Bottas isn't really an attacking driver, not like Lewis is. So I think that three things going against him, but I still believe he performed even lower than that expectation, even with those issues. So the incident with George, I agree. I'm going to give him 50-50 on this one, but I think because sometimes I think there's things you can do, but things that you probably shouldn't do if you really want to stay in the Grand Prix, right? That aren't necessarily against the rules or, totally out of order, but sometimes it's better maybe to pull back a little bit so you finish the Grand Prix. Valtteri, I think part of the issue is that he was so frustrated with his race weekend that being passed by a Williams it could have been Latifi, literally being under threat and having a Williams drive to the side of you to go around you was probably just too much for him, really. I don't think he put George off, but I think he probably played the margin a bit too thin at that high speed to exert his authority in his position on the track. And I think on George's side, I think he maybe overreacted a little bit to what Valtteri did do. Because it seemed like, I know it's really hard because it's really, you go all kinds of speed, right?
And it happens in a fraction.
And the camera angles we see are not the vision you're seeing as a driver, right? Yeah. As a driver, you're sitting in and you're just seeing the side pod of the car coming towards you, right? You're not seeing from an overview, see how much room you've really, really got.
Right.
So I think he moved the car over just a bit too much to the right, which inherently was what caused the accident. And spun him around and spun him into Valtteri. But I think Valtteri was playing a bit too hardball. I don't think Valtteri is very good at playing hardball. I think exactly what it was. And I think it was part of the frustration, part that it's a Williams, maybe part that was George. I think those do have factors. So I don't think it's bullshit, as Toto says. So that's why I'm giving them 50-50. I think George had a legitimate shot at passing on the outside. Yeah. And Valtteri had the right to make it as difficult as possible, but probably wasn't the best idea to do that at that moment.
Yeah, it was, I think of Lewis trying to get around Lando, Lando managed that pretty well and making sure that he made it difficult for Lewis. It's someone I saw was saying, he didn't think that that's just not in Valtteri's makeup. That's, he doesn't drive that way. But I thought, I don't know. You remember, do you remember those times? And there was more than one, like 2 or 3 times where he punted Kimi.
Yeah.
I mean, he gets his elbows out.
He does. He does. I just think he's a bit clumsy at it.
Yeah.
I don't think it's something maybe not in his normal wheelhouse. And so when he tries to bring it out, it's a little dull,
Yeah.
Yeah. I didn't think it was necessary for him to do it at that point. So as I say, I'll give them both.
But 50. I think Seb's kind of similar, right?
Yes. Well, Seb's tries to get even worse. Yeah.
Yeah. When he tries to get his elbows out, it gets ham-fisted pretty quickly.
Yeah. Seb's a little different because I think he actually second guesses it. And so that's why you've seen him spin to the inside of a guy who's trying to pass him on the outside, because he kind of tries it and then just kind of doesn't follow through 100%. And that's what, I've said before, it's like sometimes it's safer to be the aggressor. And I think Seb just kind of backs off from that a little bit, and it's hurt him a few times on just pulling back a little bit. But there's an art to that whole how to drive with your elbows. Yes, there is. So I don't know. I mean, if George had passed Valtteri on the outside going into that chicane, what do you think the future of Valtteri was for next year? I mean, I think ultimately that would have been a very bad place for him to be at, trying to renegotiate if he thinks he's got a shot at racing for Mercedes next year, which I don't think he does much anyway. but that definitely wouldn't have helped his cause at all.
Right. Yeah, that wouldn't have shown well.
No.
Yeah. All right, let's talk about McLaren. While we're at it,
Nice, Ron.
Lando Norris P3, Daniel Ricciardo P6. Lando was on it this weekend and damn near had a front row start had he not got caught out by the track limit issues on Saturday. But despite starting down in 7th, he managed to seriously outpace his teammate and made the best of a race restart on softs to march up to 2nd, and then held off Lewis Hamilton for several laps before succumbing to the faster Mercedes. A podium finish for Lando is huge and sends a serious signal that Daniel Ricciardo may not find it as easy to knock Lando's feet off the desk at McLaren. I think it was a big message. I think Lando, I was pretty surprised Saturday. I really was. I had no idea where that pace came from. And it got me thinking, one of the best sales job that Zach Brown may have done is convincing Toto Wolff
yes.
that giving them a Mercedes was really not going to be any threat.
Yeah.
Look, our car's our car, we got aero problems, we got rake problems. Our car's not there. Throwing that Mercedes in the back is not a big deal. We're not going to be any threat. I'm telling you, Lando was there and there on merit.
Yeah, that was a crazy qualifying. That was such a shame because, whatever time he gained was not enough to knock him off of that qualifying position that he unfortunately gave up. So there's a lot of pace in that McLaren. And once again, remarkable that they put a new engine manufacturer in the back and got that car to work so well. But now they're a threat to Mercedes. So I was like, Yeah. Haas, do you want that engine this year? Yeah.
Right. Well, but here's a good example. I think this is a good, tangible example of why Toto was never, when Renault and Red Bull had their issues, Toto was never going to put a Mercedes in the back of that Red Bull.
Right.
That was never going to, and neither was Ferrari, at the time.
Yeah.
Right. And so this is what can happen when you sell an engine to a team that can make a chassis,
Yeah.
And so kudos to McLaren, but Lando, what a great weekend he had.
He did. He is behaving more mature, which is something he definitely has to get serious. Even though he does have, the Honey Badger alongside him, I'm sure they're going to have lots of laughs, but both of them pretty serious.
Yeah.
And Lando's matching it, and showing a lot of speed, man. That's a lot of speed, and the way he eventually didn't have enough pace to hold off Lewis Hamilton. DRS obviously made it easy, but he was able to fight him off for a bit using his tools in the car, using the electric power at the right times to stave off the attack for a while. But in the end, you run out of that option, right? You can only use it so much, and then I don't have anything left to fight with, and then boom, there goes Lewis. But it was great to see, and that he still ended up in the podium. He was very happy to be in the podium. And I think McLaren's got to be ecstatic about their driver lineup, and especially how Norris is performing this year.
And you weren't holding off. He wasn't holding off a driver sort of his generation, like Ocon or somebody like that. He was holding off a 7-time champ, and that's never easy.
Yeah.
No,
not
easy.
No, not for anybody.
Yeah. Let's talk about Dan. Dan had a tougher day. Said he grained his first set. And then when he tried the softs on the race restart, he said, I just couldn't get the pace out of him for whatever reason. He admitted that his pace wasn't special on Sunday. He says he has to continue to work hard at it. He was happy for the team, though. He was happy for Lando. And the bigger, perhaps, talking point out of this for me is, regardless of what Dan, being a little down on himself, regardless of that, he did finish right there in the top 6. It's a big points haul for the team who need them, because it clearly seems to me that Ferrari are in the hunt for best of the rest, and McLaren fighting Ferrari. That's a great historic battle, is it not?
It is. And it definitely looks like that's how it looks. Yeah. And
I think it's going to be a really fun battle to watch this year if they both stay thereabouts. You have Charles Leclerc, Lando Norris, two peers. You've got Carlos Sainz, you've got Daniel Ricciardo there. I mean, these are strong driver lineups and two cars that are fighting for best of the rest. It could be fun to watch.
Yeah, no, I think it's been great to watch. You're right. I mean, Ferrari were the one you just didn't know what they were going to do. But definitely from the first two races, we're seeing that they're pretty much at least back in with a chance of a third spot. And McLaren are the ones right now that are the ones they're going to be tussling with from race after race. So it's going to be great. I think all those drivers race really well. So I think it's going to be fun to watch how that develops on a race, on a side by side. You know, it's just going to be qualifying is going to be super important, etc. It was a bit of a shame to see Dan struggle like that. We're not used to him, you know, being on the back foot. Certainly not to his teammate. But as we're finding out, Norris is, you know, more than just another teammate, right? So Ricciardo's got to get on his game, which he does have. And figure it out sooner than later.
But it had to sting, Paul, when they radioed him and said, move over.
And stung even more when Norris proved him right and pulled off about 3 seconds, you know? But the camaraderie in this team, I think, will help, you know, dull the sting a little bit because they're a team on the upswing and they're working as a team to be super competitive to race wins. And that's only going to help Daniel Ricciardo because he will have a chance at winning a race sooner than later, which he may never have had the chance to if he had stuck with Renault. So
as evidenced by this weekend. But and Dan's, you know, he's a veteran. He's been around long enough to know, you know, he's slower and it's a team effort, and Lando's quicker, and he made the right decision. Let's talk about Ferrari.
It's a shit box.
Charles Leclerc in P4, Carlos Sainz in P5. Carlos said he played it conservative in Bahrain and that he would take more chances at Imola, and he did. But they were starting to look like those chances were starting to look like he could scuttle his own race early on. Very tough qualifying session for him meant he started down in 11th. He made up several places before having a few unforced errors that cost him, but he hasn't had any running in the wet since joining Ferrari, so that was new for him. And Carlos even radioed the team. He was frustrated. He said, how many mistakes am I going to make? You know, he was really mad at himself. But he did manage to turn that all around at the race restart. When it dried out, he marched all the way back up to 5th, finished right on his teammate's tail. It was a great recovery from his own errors, admittedly, and he was frustrated, but he did take more chances. He did get on top of it, and then the conditions changed, got a little drier. He found that pace, got back up on Charles's tail, and actually had a good race as a result.
Yeah, no doubt. Yeah, I'm sure he was very frustrated, very lucky about how the race ran out with the red flag to actually give him that chance to prove, you know, he hadn't lost it completely. But changeable conditions are tough. Certainly in a car you don't know. You know, you don't know where the feel isn't there yet in a rain situation. So that's kind of understandable. So maybe we should give Perez a little bit more room. I don't know. But these are top paid athletes, so they shouldn't be making as many mistakes as they did. But they're trying, at least, I suppose. But it's good. Yeah, I mean, Sainz and Charles are going to be real tight together. And so when it did dry out and everything was equal, they're definitely there. It is really hard when the changeable conditions with tire temps and tire pressures, etc. There's some variables there that both cars aren't necessarily on the same page at the same time. And maybe the Sainz engineers maybe played something a little bit different, didn't quite work out in those changeable conditions, but ultimately ended up being a great result for Ferrari and a great drive for really both of those drives.
Yeah, well, as you mentioned, I mean, Charles, it was interesting. He was happy with 4th, no doubt, but he said that the red flag really spoiled his race, and he said he had pace, and he had a lot of advantage. He had distance between him and his nearest competitors at the time of the red flag. So the red flag wiped out all of the advantages that he had by that time. This left him in the clutches of a very quick Lando Norris and conversely Lewis Hamilton. They were both able to get by him, and that was frustrating for him. Still, as frustrating as that might be, those are, safety cars and red flags. They hurt some people, they help others. The best news out of this is that Ferrari is absolutely moving in the right direction, and they seem ready to battle McLaren, as I said, for best of the rest in 2021. So a good result for Ferrari this weekend, I think.
Yeah, no, absolutely, absolutely. And yeah, it's tough, right? I mean, you work really hard on making those gaps, and the strategy's working out, and then that just kind of gets erased, and it's a whole different race after that. Although we nearly had the lead on the restart when Max nearly threw it off. So I don't, was it because obviously we saw some issues with people spinning off and reclaim with when Perez retook his position in line. We were wondering there for a second whether Charles should have actually taken a lead away from Max, because Max kind of threw it off the road there right before the restart. But not sure if that was actually on or not. Obviously, if Max hadn't physically gone behind Charles while that incident happened, maybe it wasn't on and he would risk getting a penalty. But either way, probably Max would have beaten him anyway, but still would have been fun.
Yeah, there was Perez, like you mentioned, he went off and came back and then repassed the people that had passed him when he went off track.
Yeah.
And that was a penalty. And Kimi had a very similar, we'll get into that in just a minute. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't understand. I understand why Perez maybe did it, right? Because he's made a mistake. Oh, I got to catch it up. But I don't understand why the team, with their 30 billion people looking at computers and knowing the rules, wouldn't have told him very quickly that he had to get those places back. That's definitely something that's obvious, and taking a risk for those couple of places and taking a risk of what was a big penalty, a 10-second penalty, unless they evaluated that him letting those people back was going to cost him more than 10 seconds.
Yeah, right.
Which easily could have happened. I know on the feed they were saying, oh, he's got to come in the pits, then he's got to stop for 10 seconds, then he's got to go again. But that wasn't the penalty that was issued. So I don't know why they kept talking about that. It was literally just a 10-second penalty at his next stop. And we've seen that before, right? Remember, was it with Max? He said, I could have driven that 10-second gap rather than serve the penalty instantly.
Right.
So.
Yeah. Max said that. And I know it's a gray area, and mea culpa, I haven't gone and read I haven't went over to FIA and read the rules on this. I just remember this also being, do you remember several years ago with Lewis and Jarno Trulli, when Jarno ran off track and Lewis passed, and then he said that, you remember that? And they were like, well, did he say? And yes, he told me, and there was this big deal, and didn't
he get disqualified?
I think he got disqualified from the race.
Because he lied.
Because he lied, or he or the team did. And this is in McLaren days, I think. Yeah. And I remember, but there is definitely rules about when you run off and come back on. And it was, So anyway, and it looked like 2 or 3 people fell afoul that this weekend. Let's talk about, let's see, we're down to AlphaTauri, Pierre Gasly, P7, Yuki Tsunoda, Kuki Yuki. Oh boy. P12 for Yuki Tsunoda. Pierre said it was a tough day, a roller coaster ride, and that's an understatement, as the team gambled and started him on full wets and then seemed to really auger in on that concept and refused to pit him when it clearly wasn't the right choice. And even Esteban Ocon figured it out real quick and boxed quickly to change. But they didn't do that, and Pierre dropped back from his starting position to P5. Then he had to press really hard to recover ground he lost on those full wets. Ran wide a couple of times and eventually made it up to P7. I think it's a shame, Paul, because I think there's more pace in that car than P7.
There is a lot of pace in that car.
Yeah.
A lot of pace. And I don't know what they were thinking. I mean, they made a mistake and they just kept buying into it. That's all I can say. They kept saying, someone told him it's raining again. It's raining heavier. It's like, no, it wasn't. Yeah. They were just wishful thinking, I think. But he was like seconds a lap slower than everyone at that point. So I don't know. It must have been awful for him to keep driving under that condition. It puts you in jeopardy too, being an incident. And then in the end, they did it anyway. And then they lost all that time that it took them to. I don't understand that decision at all. So I'm sure they're going to analyze their thoughts on that after the race, but definitely a bad call during the race. Yes. I think maybe it wasn't the right thing to do. I mean, it's one thing to say, okay, we're going to start on wets and inters. You're like, okay, that's kind of a roll the dice. You just don't know where the weather's going. You can't fault anyone for that. But to leave him out there when he's basically losing seconds a lap and there's no sign of more rain coming, even though someone must have had a watering can over their garage or something. But I don't know why they did that. And I think they were very, very lucky to actually get any points at all. And obviously what they lost there, they gained back in position, and how the yellows and the stoppage put them.
Yeah. He was down in 8th, but then there was a penalty handled to Stroll, so that moved him to 7th. Yuki was very disappointed in himself. He spun at the red flag. That was a shame because he was doing really well, I thought, up to that point. It was the first time he also had been in an F1 car in the wet, so you can afford a little bit of patience there with him. Although continuously ignoring track limits, I don't know about that. That eventually got a black-white flag. Then he did it again, got a 5-second penalty. He says he feels bad. He apologized to the team because he thinks points were on the table for him, and he missed that.
I would say so. He's got pace, the boy. But
he does.
And I think AlphaTauri saw that, and we know there's going to be growing pains with him.
Sure.
He is a personality. We know that. And that shows not just from, hearing his words, but seeing him on track. He's a tiger out there. But, he needs to control that a little bit. And, there's no excuse for constantly hitting the track limit issue and then causing yourself a big penalty, because there's, all you have to do is take a little bit off. Mm-hmm. And I get it. You want to go fast, but you got to take a little bit off and continue on. So he wasn't able to hold himself back enough there. So that's something he definitely has to learn to control.
Yeah, for sure. Let's see. Aston Martin and Lance. It was Lance Stroll, I believe.
I want it now. What's the matter with those twats down there?
In P8, Sebastian Vettel in P15. That would be. That's exactly where he finished. In Bahrain, I think it was. Yeah. So Sebastian Vettel in P15.
Can I go for a wee?
Yes. You better. Don't come back. Someone locked the door on the toilet.
Yes, the weekend started off with Otmar suggesting that they want to have a serious conversation with the FIA about these regulation changes that have really hampered and impacted their car, and even went as far as to say that litigation was not off the table as an option. So this clearly shows you, folks, just how upset this team is and how they feel their current pace has been impacted by these regulation changes. They were all in on this, and they were not planning to write the season off, and they are already struggling. The race didn't fare much better, with both cars experiencing brake issues on the formation lap. And that prompted, Lance went through and his brakes were on fire. And they kept told him, just keep going, go and blow the flames out, So he went through but this prompted the team. They had to do all of the work to try to fix these brakes on the grid.
Yep.
They were unable to fix Seb's. They got Lance taken care of, unable to fix. That didn't show you the pecking order there. Got Lance's all sorted, but Seb.
Got one guy, the old guy that usually drives people back and forth to the hotel working on Seb's car, and then you just got the whole team there.
Yeah, you got 12 guys on Lance's car. Yeah. You got Hank over there working on Seb. Yeah, Hank, go ahead and fix Seb's car. We're all going to be over here fixing Lance's car.
We'll bring you the torque wrench in a minute.
Yeah. Already.
Get in there, help him.
That's right. Already.
People over there, too.
I know. You got to think Seb's thinking, the hell did I walk into?
Yes.
Charles Leclerc was the fair-haired gold child over there, and now I walk over here and everybody's behind Lance, and I'm over here starting from the pit lane, and then they didn't get his tires on quick enough within the 5-minute rule, so he got a penalty for that, and everybody was like, oh, see, Seb sucks. So, well, shit, anybody would suck from everything that happened to him.
Yeah, it was interesting. I don't know why they didn't get the tires on. They looked like they were waiting.
Yeah,
make a decision, and they just waited too long, or thought they didn't need to adhere by the same rules.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah, it's an interesting issue that they were actually able to fix it.
Yeah,
That's what I'm trying to figure out. What was going on there on both those cars that they had that catastrophic failure after a warm-up lap, and yet were able to fix it, and both cars finished the race.
Yeah,
Well,
I know.
Seb's car, I guess, didn't finish the race, but not for that reason.
Not for that reason, yeah.
Yeah.
And I know that, there was several shots of one mechanic just working his butt off, trying to, he's down there and he's crazy and he's barking out orders and calling for different pieces and what do you need? And somebody's like, well, he's got his mask pulled down. I was like, well,
who said that?
Somebody on social media. And I was like, okay, all right, listen. They're all in their own little bubble. Okay. Yeah. They've all been tested. This guy is furiously trying to replace an entire brake assembly in 15 minutes. So give the guy just show him a little quarter here,
It's okay. The brake dust will kill him before COVID does.
Right. I got the black lung pop. Yeah. So anyway, despite all that drama, Lance actually really, to his credit, had a decent race, to be fair.
Yeah, he did.
And while down on pace, he had some really good passes. One of them was deemed illegal. That left him with a 5-second penalty after the race. So that moved him from 7th down to 8th. But, I take the stuffing out of Lance. He did a great job and really showed he had pace, had some patience. He was in some passing battles there, didn't lose his head. Kudos to Lance. It's P8, but still, he's got a lot on his shoulders. And this team, imagine if you're Lance, your dad's pissed off, he's furious with the regulations, Otmar's threatening law suits and all this stuff. And here's this young man trying to put together a race, and he's young. He hasn't been in F1 as long as Seb has, and kudos to him for doing a great job.
Yeah, he does seem to do good in rainy and changeable conditions.
He does.
So I'm trying to figure out what he's got there. That he doesn't always show, but he does a really good job, and he did have a really good race. Especially they were having transmission shifting issues. They had the brake issues. So I'm as much as they're saying they're never going to have a chance at finishing well, I think where they finished was actually pretty good considering how F1 has come down on them, etc. So, great race. And Seb, really behind the 8 ball, right at the very beginning. And he actually started to make progress.
He did.
The car's not obviously super fast or super dynamic, but he was gradually
once he got the slicks on.
Yeah. And, unfortunately, some other issue. But, I think if Seb had started in a good position at the start of the race, maybe he would have been in the points too. So hopefully, I think that team needs to be less distracted by trying to change the rules that they weren't on top of when they designed their car.
I agree.
And just get on with the job.
Yeah, I agree. Once Seb got those dry tires on, he was the first one to switch. And then he set a fast lap. And then he had a pretty good battle with Alonso, to be honest, and then retired with concerns over transmission.
Yeah, I wonder why I'm imagining they put him out there because obviously Lance was in the hunt for some good points. And so I figure they maybe put him out there early just to kind of maybe give them a leg up. But problem is everyone's seeing Vettel out there, right? It was Vettel and Schumacher out there. And as soon as they went down to equal times, everyone started coming in, and that's all it took. But everyone's looking at the same time. It's not like, Aston Martin are able to hide that information. So.
Right. The team is in trouble for 2021. And, on balance, so far, Stroll's outshining a 4-time champ. So good for him. Let's talk about Alpine. Fernando Alonso. What was he? P9.
P10. P10. I think you got him transposed.
Oh, did I? No, he is P10. Ocon was P9. That's right.
Correct.
Both cars in the points because of the penalties in front of them with Kimi Räikkönen. Alpine looked to be struggling a lot but with the attrition and penalties. Both cars were in the points today. Esteban said it was a challenging race. He had fun battling Fernando. He got stuck behind Kimi effectively, and it's not easy to pass an Imola. It's that's the way it is. So he finished where he started in P9. He also, Paul, started on full wets, but they figured out pretty darn quick that wasn't the tire, and they boxed him early.
They pulled the Band-Aid off quickly.
Yes. Yeah, they did. Yeah, they took the penalty for that decision early, and that gave him time with the red flag and everything else to get back in the points.
Mm-hmm. Yep. I mean, when those things happen, the sooner you make that decision, because with yellows, with pace cars, it's not all lost if you do it early. Right. But if you just prolong it, then it's going to be painful. So
Yeah,
it's a good idea to accept your fate and get on with it.
Yeah. Let's see, Fernando. Different story for him. He was he was kind of all over the place on Sunday, but he did say the car was better than Bahrain, and that's a positive. Much was made about the unforced errors that he made. I don't know. It's Fernando. I feel like he's pushing that car to the absolute limit and trying to figure out what needs to be fixed on this car. And I mean, he's just wringing its neck. And yeah, he had some unforced errors, but it's not a rookie move. It's not a junior league performance in the hands of a guy like Fernando. I think, he's pushing the limits and trying to get that car up where it doesn't belong.
Yeah. I mean, I think he's still working his eye in too.
Yeah.
Quite honestly. Right. I mean, I don't think we can excuse Alonso for making mistakes and not, and come down on Bottas and come down on all the other guys that did make mistakes, so because he's a world champion, he should make less still.
Yep.
So I'm not going to give him a free rein there, but I'm not worried about Alonso's pace. I'm more worried about the Alpine's pace.
Yeah, right.
Overall, because it doesn't look like you can do anything with it. It's just not a fast car right now, so hopefully they can get their heads around that.
It was Alonso's first points since Singapore 2018.
Oh,
for those of you playing at home. Alfa Romeo, Kimi Räikkönen, P13, Antonio Giovinazzi, P14. It could have been. This is a little bit of an unforeseen sort of tragedy in this sense for Alfa Romeo, because it could have been a double point scoring affair for this team. Kimi spun during the warm-up lap behind the safety car, dropping him to 10th. He then rejoined in the order in P8, but according to the rules, he should have driven through the pit lane if he was not able to get back to his previous position in the order before the first safety car line. And because he failed to do so, he was hit with a 30-second penalty after the race, which dropped him out of the points and down to P13.
Huh. Why would that be penalty? So obviously him and Sergio did very similar things.
Yeah.
But it's about where that safety car line is that was the difference there.
And I haven't had time since we're recording on Sunday evening. I haven't had time to look at that rule, but that's what he fell afoul of.
Right. Seems like he should have had a similar penalty to what Sergio had.
Yeah.
All the same. So, but I understand there are these lines around the track that certain things have to happen in, so for whatever reason, but seems a little unfair. I get that he shouldn't have taken his position. I don't think if you spin off, you shouldn't take your position no matter what. I think that should be a rule across the line in all racing, right? If you can't keep the pace of the pace car and other cars can, then you need to cede your position, so
Antonio was running in the points as well, but had to stop with a brake issue. They had to make a quick adjustment. He came in, they made an adjustment, and he went right back out.
That was a quick adjustment too.
It was, yeah. And it unfortunately dropped him out of the points. And Fred said, hey, yeah, it was unfortunate, but clearly we were battling in the points, and we've got a car to do so. I guess that's really the big question from this team. Both were running in the points, and the big question is does this team have the pace to fight for points each weekend? And according to them, they feel like they do.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was better performance by then. We know we kind of put them in the bottom three, and that's kind of where they come up. But being the third up in the bottom three does give you a chance of scoring points from time to time. I don't think they'll have a chance to score points every weekend, but this was one of the places that was pretty good for them, I think. So so points lost for sure.
Yeah. Let's see. Speaking of points lost, let's talk about Haas.
Haas, pointless.
Yeah. Mick Schumacher, P16, Nikita Mazepin, and P17. Now, before you start taking the stuffing out of Mazepin, Nikita had an incident with Latifi, but it was not Nikita's fault.
No.
It was Nicholas Latifi's fault. So don't,
That incident.
Yeah.
The 10 after that had nothing to do with Latifi.
Well, yeah. Now, you could heap scorn on him for his late race spin. But, they were tricky conditions out there, Paul, on Sunday, and he was pushing hard, maybe a little too hard. I don't know.
I don't think he was pushing that hard.
Okay, maybe he wasn't.
He was very slow.
Yeah.
being slow and making mistakes. I mean, Mick Schumacher was seconds a lap quicker than him most of the time.
Yes.
He was not, Mazepin is not adaptable to changeable conditions. I think he really, we know why he's in F1. And sometimes these drivers, like Lance Strolls can actually, hold their head above and fight and have a decent run of things. But I don't think Nikita is one of those guys. I mean, I think.
Or Latifi.
No, actually, well, we get to Latifi, but
okay.
I actually think Latifi did really had a really good weekend till that point.
He did until that point. Yes. Until
that point. And that was a big mistake by him. He just lost his sense of everything. Yeah. So, but Mazepin, he made mistakes. That the Latifi thing wasn't his mistake, but the more I looked at it was just at any given moment, he was way off the pace of the whole field, quite honestly. So,
well, and this sheds a little light on it. Mick spun and damaged his front wing when he was trying to keep heat in his tires. And with a closed pit lane, he had to trundle around for a few laps with no nose. Right. And he lost a lot of positions. It was his first time in an F1 car in the wet. And what a baptism by fire he and Yuki had, to say the least. Now, that being said, even though he had no nose and he had to go around a few laps while the pit lane was closed, when he eventually did stop, got a new nose, got tires on, he was able to recover pretty well and beat his teammate.
Oh, yeah. He was like 25 seconds down. Like 3 laps later, he was by him. So, yeah, I think Mick actually had a pretty decent race. That's a mistake, obviously, rookie mistake, you can call it. But he's going to learn from that. But ultimately, I think he actually did a really good job in that car, apart from that one mistake. And obviously, the difference between him and his teammate is staggering. But I think overall, the Haas team need to just kind of help Schumacher.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about Williams.
What the hell?
All right, 2 DNFs. George.
Scream.
Yeah. Oh well. Yeah, I could do Sir Frank's scream. All right. George had a good race going and was heading for the points, but he clashed with Bottas. He said it was Valtteri's fault, suggested that he wouldn't have jinked right if it was any other driver, and this did not go down well with Toto. And if you're looking to take Valtteri's seat next year, that probably wasn't helping his cause much. Despite that, he was having a really good race up until that point. Now, after things had calmed down, and by the time the team press release went out, he had toned his rhetoric down after the race. I'm sure somebody said, enough of that crap, get on with it. It was a racing incident. Yeah. And we've talked about that already with Bottas, but anything you want to add about George's race?
No, I mean, obviously it's, in the heat of the moment, a lot of people will say a lot of things, right? And as I said, I think Toto's going to have a word with George, and it's not necessary to say who was right and who was wrong. It's just, how do we behave in that situation? Certainly when you're a Mercedes driver and you've had an incident with the main Mercedes car, you don't want to start slagging people off or saying this and that. It's part of the learning experience to be, a professional, I suppose.
He's frustrated, Paul. Do you remember how he was when he first got at Williams? That team was a dog, and he would never say anything bad about it. I mean, he was, and matter of fact, we commented about how professional he was handling himself, given the situation he's in, given the car is a pig, and he was not slagging off the team. He was, very. Now he's frustrated. He's had a taste of that Mercedes, damn near won a race in that Mercedes, feels like he should be in that Mercedes, given the Bottas's performance, and to get taken out by Bottas and have that, he's pissed.
Yeah.
And it just boiled over,
It did boil over, and I think it's okay. As I said, I think it's okay. He's got fire in his belly.
It's okay to be chippy.
Yeah.
He wants that ride.
He wants that ride. Give it to me, Toto, and I'm sure Toto doesn't appreciate those words, but that's okay too. Sometimes in the heat of the moment, even Toto may think maybe that's a good thing that he's like that. That's something you can't train someone to have, that desire and that passion to be that successessful. So
right, I agree.
Yep.
Stick it to him, George. Get that ride.
Yep.
Latifi ended his race on lap 1.
Yes, he did.
But having said that, he had a really good qualifying session. Now, some people say that George was a little shook by Latifi's performance, and that's what made him have his, collision with Bottas. I don't think that. But I do think Latifi actually was heading to have a good weekend and just unfortunately killed it.
Yep. He qualified well. We had a good weekend altogether, and changeable conditions. He got caught out. Came back on the track. Just there was one car left on the track. They hadn't bumped by him, and he probably wasn't expecting anyone to be still on the track. So lost his bearings. Didn't understand that Mazepin was there. So it's unfortunate for the Latifi. I was really impressed by his lap, and I was like, okay, Latifi, you can fight it out. If you can out qualify George, then on some days that's more than most people have done. So that would have been a good thing for him to consolidate that. Unfortunately, it didn't. So not much to talk about there, except that it does show Latifi has pace if the situation arises and everything clicks for him.
Yep. Agreed. All right, let's hand out some awards, and then I'm going to do a little bit of mailbag. The first award of this podcast is always Move of the Race. Yes, Move of the Race. I believe we are in sync on this one, Paul.
Yes.
I believe we both feel that the move of the race was McLaren issuing team orders to Daniel Ricciardo to move over for Lando, which allowed Lando to get a podium.
Yep, absolutely. I mean, it's Lando forced it. Ricciardo's obviously struggling a little bit. They'll turn around on any other given day. So for them to make that decision quick and not have to fight with the teammates, that earned McLaren the success that they got at the end of the race. So
that's right.
And
Dan took it like a pro.
Yep.
So that was our move of the race. Next up is Donkey of the Race. All right.
It might be shorter podcast if we just talk about the people that aren't the donkey of the race.
Yeah, right.
Because there were so many
there were
people that just earned the right to be in the running for this. Well done, everybody.
Yes,
you worked hard for it, and you've achieved that right. So,
I know. Yes. I chose my guy, and I know who you chose, and I would say these two were chosen because of what was potential of the car they're in and the team they're in versus what they delivered. I went with Valtteri Bottas. Who did you go with?
And I went with Sergio Perez. Yeah,
agreed.
I mean, you got to look at those guys playing first and second, their teammates, and they ended up nowhere.
Yeah, so nowhere.
Points, no nothing.
No points, no nothing. They left a lot on the table.
A lot on the table, and they made more than one error during the Grand Prix. So
absolutely. All right. Well, that means we're down to Drive of the Race.
We'll do it live.
Yes. All right, Paul.
No, Grace, I'm not going to bob my head.
Yes, I think we are in sync on this choice, are we not?
No, I don't think so.
Oh,
I think we're going to split the decision.
Oh, we are splitting it up. I know who you're going with. I forgot. Yep. I have chosen Lando Norris for my Drive of the Race.
Done.
I think he had a terrific race, but
He's
also
the people's champion.
He was the people's champion. That's right. I rarely end up choosing the same people that the F1.com everybody votes for, but in this case, I am. I think that was a good choice. Lando had a great race, but I also agree with your choice, who was
Charles Leclerc. Leclerc. Chuck the duck. I think, obviously the race didn't pan out for him ultimately because of the other circumstances not under his control. But I think he drove an impressive weekend, including qualifying. He was fighting at the front of the field the whole time. The car didn't quite have the pace to put him on the podium, but he did everything and anything to keep it up there. And I just thought he drove a fantastic race with the Ferraris driven. Obviously Sainz was right behind him at the end there, but I think the race that he had run up until that point was impressive, and he should have been in second in the end if it all kind of kept going without that red flag issue.
Agreed.
Yeah.
All right, let's do some mailbag.
You've got mail.
this up from Timothy in Sydney. Hey, Timothy in Sydney, our friends down under in the great southern land, it might be said. Timothy, I won't read all of it, but what Timothy was arguing was this whole concept of regulations and trying to tighten the regulations and get some parity. And Timothy was saying, look, the budget cap completely changes things and offers a potential to rewrite the rules. Yes, we have big change coming, but what about an idea of teams' overall performance and development being limited by the cost cap and not just restricting the rules, not a restrictive rule set. He said many of today's rules have been written to control costs. So with the new cost cap, we can now undo those rules. And his point was, if the team wants to test 20 days a year, then why not? If they want to run 20 sets of tires of the weekend, why not? If a team wants to use 5 power units, then why not? Just make a restrictive cost cap that everything has to follow. And you could, and to Timothy's point, you could start adding things into that have to be included in that cost cap to even cram down farther on what these teams could do with unlimited restrictions, like putting the driver salaries and the top 3 staff, executive staff salaries as part of the cost cap. And then all of a sudden they have very little money to get crazy with their design, right?
Right.
So his point was, why not just double down on that cost cap situation and prevent it from having these outrageous guidelines and F1 restrictive rule sets trying to mitigate costs? What do you think, Paul?
I like it. I mean, it's never going to happen because obviously, first off, the people voting for this would be the people that you're asking to take less money. So,
right.
That ain't going to work.
Right.
But I get the concept. The concept is you've given a pool of money and you want to spend it all on brake development. You want to spend it all on a chassis. You want to spend it on, I think you've still got to, I think the tire allocation still has to be, consistent from team to team. But I understand the theory. It would change how teams go about their business and really have to have some outside of the box thinking of what really is the best strategy for it. It will change things up a little bit, but I think ultimately some teams will get it really right and some teams will probably get it really, really wrong. And so may end up with more disparity within from car to car to car. And I think ultimately what they're trying to get to is everyone's got the same car and everyone's driving the same pace because that's what the fans want to see, right? So
apparently,
but I think there may be something within this concept that could still work within the framework they got there. So I do like the idea. I get it.
I'm kind of thinking, Paul, that it may not go to the extent of what Timothy's suggesting, but it wouldn't surprise me to see a few things start to be tailored because we're only in the first year of this cost cap. Right. If the FIA and F1 feels that they can successfully monitor those expenses and teams aren't hiding R&D in their road car divisions like Mercedes or McLaren or Ferrari and all that kind of thing, if they feel like it's working, I could see them tweaking it and maybe saying, you know what, okay, now some of the driver salaries got to be in that, or now some of this has got to be in that, and they could start stuffing a little bit more into that cost cap number, which would restrict or I could see that happening, I guess, in some level.
Right. And I like the idea of, hey, do you want to do 20 days of testing? You want to do 20 days of CFD? Do you want to do maybe a little change up there would be kind of interesting too, to see how that works. Some things, some teams don't have that computer, the whole power of CFD and just have the multiple engineers. So maybe they're better off going on the track and running around a few laps,
Yeah, it could be, instead of this always this constant race of this migration path of technology and sim work and CFD and all that kind of stuff. Maybe they'd prefer to design the car and go out and do 10 days of testing or 15 days of testing, and they'll ferret it out on the track. Who knows? So good point, Timothy. It's a good question. I appreciate it. Finally, in the mailbag, Jason has a question for you, Paul.
Okay, go ahead, Jason.
Jason says, question. Thanks. I'm a little nervous. Long-time listener, first-time caller, Paul.
Jason's like, I do not sound like that.
I don't sound like that. Thank you, sir. I wanted to ask you. No, I don't. Yeah. Jason's probably got this deep voice. Says, "Oi, Paul, So anyway, Jason asked this. I'm curious to know, why did Formula One still have small wheels? I remember hearing that the larger volume of air inside the tire as a result of the smaller wheel acted like additional suspension. Does that actually provide additional mechanical grip? Is a small wheel actually better, or is it not a big deal either way? Should I run out and get 13-inch wheels on my sporty little VW Golf?
Yes, run again, just because it looked funny. Yes.
It would look funny.
It looked funny. Well, we know Formula One don't like change, and this is one of the last things that they'll ever change, right? This whole the teams have been developing the chassis with these 13-inch wheels, and the tires have developed. And yes, the 13-inch wheel and the big tire works as a secondary spring, and it's all part of tuning the vehicle in. And so it's just an additional adjustment. That's why the tire pressures are so crucial, because that's really changing the dynamic of the car. Ultimately, you see how the tires flex, when they get put out over the curbs, etc. Just a lot of movement in there. But the teams it kind of helped control Formula One's pace as well. By controlling that tire like that, but
stiffer sidewalls and that kind of thing.
But now we're going to move to something a lot stiffer sidewalls. So the whole concept of designing the car is going to be very, very different. Now they're going to have to control the car with the dampers and the springs a lot more rather than rely on the give in the sidewall to kind of give them that extra control and compliance with the road. So it's a different approach. I'm not, I think in the end, it's better, performance-wise. You're going to choose, a 19-inch wheel with a very small sidewall over a 13-inch wheel with a foot-long sidewall. Ultimately, because there's the bigger the sidewall is, the more movement there is, and the more variations can happen with movement in the car, right? If you've got a stiff sidewall, there's going to be a lot less variations. You control the car a lot more. So I think ultimately it's a much better move to put the car there, but I think it's just something that Formula One saw no need to change, and the tire, the companies to change the evolution of a Formula One tire to that is costly, and no one really wanted to take on that cost for no good reason until finally someone said, you just have to do it because we're doing it,
Yeah. And it must be said that the car you managed, the 23 Aston Martin, doesn't use 13-inch wheels.
It does not. No.
It uses those really cool low profile high sidewall Michelins.
Absolutely. And there's still a lot in the tire and in sidewall flex, etc. But a lot of the stiffness in the Formula One cars is going to have to be loosened up a little bit, because they're going to have to soak up a lot of that, the curbs and the undulations in the road now with the suspension, rather than just kind of rely on the sidewall to kind of take up that slack.
Right. All right. Well, that does it for this podcast, if you can believe that. But are we back next week?
Is there another race next week?
No, not next week. Nope. Grace and I are back next week. That's right.
Lovely.
And I will be nursing a
oh, that's right.
Bad
that's why
wing.
We're doing this tonight.
That's right. I have surgery on my elbow. Boy. So I'll be.
Are you going to be able to fight again?
No, I hope so. That's the whole reason I'm having surgery on my elbow.
Put me back in the ring.
Yeah, put me back in, man. Cut me, Mick. So I'll hopefully I won't be too whacked out on painkillers and in a sling or a stent, but we'll be back next week to talk about whatever it is Grace wants to talk about. Whether it's salad cream or why Miracle Whip's better than mayo, who knows?
Yes.
But anyway, Paul, thanks for coming on and unpacking the race with me, of course.
Good, fun, exciting, eventful race, I thought.
Yeah, I did too.
I like that track. Fun tracks.
It is a fun track. Yeah. So anyway, all right. Well, until next week, be sure to stop by the website and share your opinion. Just do it to quorum civility at theparcfermé.com. Huge thank you to all of our Patreon supporters, because we could not and literally would not be able to do this podcast if it wasn't for our Patreon supporters. So if you have ever felt compelled to show your appreciation, you certainly can do that at our website. Go to theparcfermé.com. On the right-hand side, there's a link. You can go to our Patreon page and support us there. If you like the podcast, go over to iTunes, give us a good rating over there, give us some love. And until next week, when we do this all over again, this is Todd, a.k.a. Negative Camber, saying so long.
That's it, man. Game over, man. It's game over.